Veydran Rul, the Pale Bannered Sun. From the Killer and Keeper universe. Origin: from the Red Marches, a land of scarlet soil and wind-scoured stone, where battlefields are never buried, only built upon by those who once believed in the righteousness of empire, naive to the world's layered cruelties. The hills roll like fossilized waves, each dip a grave, each rise a throne of broken banners. At twilight, the ridgelines resemble the backs of slumbering giants long dead, and when wind sweeps through their crests, it moans like a dirge for forgotten legions. Craters filled with stagnant water gleam like black mirrors, reflecting stars that no longer shine. Scorched tree stumps protrude from the earth like the broken fingers of buried titans. The air carries a scent of rust and regret, and sometimes, when the fog thickens, voices rise from the ground. Not cries, but muttered warnings in dialects no longer spoken. These lands do not merely remember war, they repeat it in shadows and echo. Sparse grass grows copper-green under a haze of ash, and the sky often hangs heavy with the smell of blood and rain. Rivers cut deep scars into the land, their banks lined with the rusted remnants of old campaigns. It is a place that forgets nothing and forgives even less. Its heartland, the Ashen Fold, is said to house bones older than kings, and its winds carry whispers that only the dying understand. The people of the Marches, called Ashborn by outsiders, wear silence like armor and pass down stories not through song, but scarification. It is a land where iron grows quicker than wheat, and where loyalty is judged not by word, but by who stands with you in the black of dusk. Ancient waystones dot the roads, half-sunken monoliths said to hum when war nears. Even the crows of the Marches have a different call, sharp and scraping, as if they too remember the screams of conquest. Legends say the ground itself rejects shallow graves. Bodies left to rot often re-emerge, unearthed by roots or rain. The Marches do not keep the dead, they lend them. Ancestry: one of the last bastards of a blood-drunk dynasty of tyrant kings. Their father, King Ruthven the Iron-Willed, ruled with a doctrine of terror cloaked in rhetoric. A man whose every breath was war and whose throne was flanked by the skulls of dissenters. Ruthven believed loyalty was best proven in blood. He saw emotion as weakness and dissent as treason, demanding fealty in acts of cruelty. Veydran became his blade, forged young and swung often. Public floggings, razings, and executions were rites of passage in his father's court, an endless theater of control. One of the most infamous rituals was the rite of hollow benediction, held during the black moons. Nobles and generals who had failed Ruthven were stripped bare and forced to kneel upon the altar of resolve, a slab carved from obsidian and bone. Before a silent crowd, their tongues were removed and hung from crimson hooks strung above the throne, each one a symbol of loyalty reclaimed through silence. Survivors were branded with a sigil known as the King's Wound, a spiral of interlocked chains etched into the flesh with burning iron. Most did not survive. Those who did became part of the bleeding choir, mute enforcers who spoke only in screams, clad in red veils and iron bells. Ruthven's rule was marked by a golden age of military expansion and internal dread. He replaced local councils with royal inquisitors, and statues of himself were erected at every city gate, each one carved with a hollow heart, a symbol he claimed meant devotion to the realm over self. In truth, it was a reminder. All hearts belong to the throne. His palace housed the bleeding court, a chamber of veiled clerics and whispering judges, where verdicts were sung and sentences inscribed into the skin of prisoners before execution. Every year, the hollow vigil was held, where nobles walked barefoot across hot iron sigils as proof of loyalty, while the common folk were compelled to offer a pound of bone, a child's milk tooth, an elder's knuckle, a criminal's skull. His name still lingers like a sickness in the minds of the capital's older generation, spoken in gasps and shadows. Yet to many within the city, Ruthven is still revered. A tyrant, yes, but their tyrant. The statues that line the avenues remain scrubbed and garlanded by loyalists, and his likeness still appears on holy relics and coin. The hollow heart symbol, once feared, is now worn in defiance of change. Songs praising his strength are sung in military halls, and tavern walls bear murals of his campaigns. His brutality is retold as strength, his paranoia repackaged as vigilance. To the privileged, Ruthven was the shield that preserved their place. To the fearful, he was the order that kept chaos at bay. In his shadow, the city still breathes his law, and to some, the return of his son is not dread, it is hope for restoration. While nobles profited, commoners learned to smile through fear and hide their dead where the crown could not count them. After his mysterious death during a storm-racked campaign in the west, no body was recovered. Some believe he drowned, others whisper that the marchers reclaimed him, unwilling to lend him even to death. In his youth, Veydran was a murderous puppet of his father, blindly executing decrees in pursuit of approval. He mistook cruelty for loyalty and order for justice, never questioning the injustices committed in the crown's name, until the blood on his hands became too familiar. He oversaw purges in border villages where even children were branded as dissenters and burned libraries in the name of loyalty, silencing entire generations of thought. In the siege of Hearthrow, he ordered the flooding of the lower districts to root out rebels, knowing full well it would drown the sick and the elderly first. His hands delivered verdicts not born of law, but of fear, each life taken a coin spent for royal favor. Appearance, Veydran bears a fair, youthful build that belies the age of his deeds, a cruel irony carved into his very frame. His skin, almost alabaster, is a pale, weathered canvas, etched with lash scars from his father's drunken beatings, burns from sacred trials, and jagged cuts too symmetrical to be accidents. These marks form a grotesque tapestry of duty and devotion, mapping the path of a life spent earning approval through agony. His unnaturally green hair, like the first sprouts on a grave mound, falls in uneven strands, often matted with ash, resin, and dried blood. Cold, dull green eyes stare outward with the flatness of drowned glass, haunted and hard, seeing through lies and hope alike. He wears a frayed officer's cloak, once crimson and now the color of old wounds, draped over armor cobbled from battlefield salvage, plates that do not match, dented helms with faces pried off, chain torn and rewoven. Every piece is etched with the names of those he failed. On his right pauldron, a jagged iron cherub sits twisted in mock prayer, a salvaged relic from a burned chapel, now his silent talisman. Though he appears in his late 20s, the sheer weight of guilt and culture rot make his presence feel ancient, as if time coils differently around him. Personality: tactical, melancholic, self-loathing with moments of transcendent fury. In private, he relies heavily on Kalter leaves, an addictive urnbear forest herb that dulls the mind and muffles memory. Smoked, brewed, or chewed to silence grief and slow the ghosts, it grants him brief calm at great cost. His fingers are often stained green from overuse, and his men know to leave him alone when the smoke curls thick from his tent. Though it clouds his judgment, he embraces the fog, preferring numbness over the sharp edge of remembrance. The Kalter haze dims his sharpest insights, and makes him prone to long silences and withdrawn spells between commands. While some of his captains question his stability, none deny his brilliance in battle. He remains a ferocious fighter, almost transcendent in combat, where instinct takes over and grief transforms into brutal clarity. But outside the bloodshed, the habit breeds distance. Few approach him without need, and fewer still dare to question the green stains or his wandering gaze. Even Brask has learned to wait until the smoke fades before delivering counsel. Ideology, history must be broken to build peace. Veydran's rebellion was not born in fire, but in cold disillusionment. Once the loyal blade of his father's throne, he came to see the crown not as a symbol of order, but as a mask for cruelty. His break was quiet at first, small refusals, unspoken defiance. But when his siblings' pleas were silenced and their truths unearthed too late, Veydran turned fully against the lineage that raised him. No banners were raised, no grand declaration made. His rebellion was written in the blood of oaths broken and lies laid bare. He fights not to claim a throne, but to see its pedestal shattered. At the heart of the capital, in the grand forum where statues of monarchs once stood in solemn tribute, there now lies a field of broken marble. Veydran ordered the central spire toppled, a monument to his father's rule. Its cracked plinth juts from the earth like a wound, jagged and unhealed, surrounded by shattered faces of emperors past. There, amidst the ruin, moss and wind carry whispers of what was lost and what might rise. The pedestal remains broken, not merely as a symbol, but as a wound left open, to remind all who pass that no throne is sacred and no legacy is beyond judgment. Worldview. No one innocent survives the shaping of nations. Veydran believes innocence is a luxury that collapses under the weight of survival, especially for those once blind to the shadows cast by their own flags. From palace plots to peasant betrayals, he has seen mercy twisted into weakness and justice bartered like coin. He watched children grow into executioners and kings weep only for their own legacies. The machinery of nations grinds all who touch it, and so he trusts neither tears nor oaths. Weapon, Judicar, a double-bladed glaive once wielded by his father, reforged into 2 pieces, and never whole again. It was split by his father himself, who declared that neither Veydran nor his siblings would ever match his legacy. The act was both punishment and prophecy, a final judgment cast in steel, meant to remind them they were fragments, never whole. He shattered the glaive in the great hall, striking it against the ancestral throne before the eyes of the court. The echo of breaking steel silenced all but his voice. You are heirs to a broken name. Let the weapon mirror your worth. The 2 halves of Judicar became distinct in form and character. One blade curved like a crescent of judgment, etched with faded script from forgotten laws. The other jagged, unfinished at the hilt, wrapped in raw leather and scorched sigils, a weapon of wrath. Both shimmer with a muted sheen, like moonlight dulled by smoke, and carry the memory of their violent sundering in the way they hum faintly when unsheathed. From that day, Veydran bore the 2 halves as both shame and defiance. He reforged them not into unity, but into a mirrored pair, twin blades that could never rejoin. In battle they became his signature. In memory they remained his burden. Each swing was a rejection of the legacy that cursed him, each clash a reckoning against the throne that deemed him less. Companion. Vern, a skeletal warcat reanimated, follows him only when he grieves. In those moments, Veydran sits in silence beside the flickering embers of his campfire, whispering the names of the dead as if trying to remember who they were before he made them ghosts. Varn appears then, emerging from shadow and memory, resting its skull against his shoulder in mute acknowledgement. No growls, no purring, only presence. But Varn is more than a mourner. In the heat of battle, when Veydran's rage spirals into stillness, Varn sometimes appears unbidden, stalking through the carnage like a deathless omen. Enemies falter at its sight, struck not by fear, but by confusion. A beast that moves without breath, whose bones glint like ivory beneath rust-streaked moonlight. Its presence fractures morale, whispering of old curses and vengeance that cannot die. Allies, too, keep their distance, unsure if the war cat is protector or reaper. To Veydran, Vern is the physical echo of his guilt and grief, a familiar born of mourning, animated by the weight of what he's lost. When it fights, it does so with the same silence that haunts their vigils, and when it disappears, it leaves the scent of cold ash and an emptiness that lingers. Vern never judges, only watches, as if weighing the depth of sorrow in the weight of Veydran's breath. Los executed his half-siblings for their sins, later learned their rebellion had been just. The massacre at Blackridge Keep still haunts him, the snow-red dawn where he gave the order, thinking it righteous. They had sought to end the tyrant bloodline's grip, pleading for a reformation of the crown's cruelty. He silenced their cries with steel, convinced at the time they were traitors corrupted by ambition. The letters found afterward, tucked beneath floorboards, etched in code and desperation, spoke only of freedom, unity, and the end of inherited brutality. The parchment, brittle and blood-specked, seemed to weep in candlelight, as if the ink had never truly dried. Some bore symbols that shimmered faintly when touched, as though still warm with the last breath of the writer. Every night since, their voices return to him in dreams, but they do not come as they were, no longer siblings, but spectres robed in snow and shadow, faces frozen in expressions of silent pleading. They circle his bed in silence, mouthing forgiveness he cannot hear, their eyes ever watching, ever bleeding ink. At times he wakes with their whispers lodged beneath his skin like splinters, bleeding only when he is alone. In these moments, he wonders if their absolution is real, or simply the price of memory dressed in mercy's mask. Relationships. Veydran once loved a tactician named Celira, a rival-turned-confidant who, like him once, believed too deeply in the system, trusting in the ideals of a just empire, blind to its rot. Her presence was the last ember of hope in him, the one who reminded him that the dream of justice had not yet died. When she was slain by the very order he defended, it wasn't just a loss, it was betrayal incarnate, a cruel confirmation that everything he fought for was hollow. Her death shattered him in ways no blade ever could. In the quiet that followed, the grief burned into something colder, clarity. That moment became a crucible from which his new path was forged. He stopped defending ideals and began dismantling the throne that murdered them. Celira's name became his war cry in silence, the memory he held when the night was too long. His only surviving connection is to Commander Brask, an old warhound with broken knees and a sharper memory than sword, who follows out of loyalty, not faith. Brask had served under Veydran's father and saw firsthand the poison of that reign, yet stayed not for love of crown, but for the boy he once taught to ride. It was Brask who warned Veydran of the council's deceit before the Blackridge massacre, though his voice was drowned in duty. After Celira's death, it was Brask who found Veydran half-mad with grief, blade buried in stone beside her unmarked grave. Flashbacks haunt Veydran still, the scent of her ink-stained hands guiding maps by candlelight, her laughter echoing through the war tent after one of Brask's dry jokes, the night she whispered, "Even rot can grow roots again," before a kiss that felt like dawn. In those memories, the air thickens with old candle smoke and the rustle of parchment, and her presence lingers like the warmth of sun on frost-bitten skin. And then the final memory, her eyes wide in disbelief as the Imperial archers loosed their bolts, time seeming to crack like glass around them. But it wasn't supposed to end that way. Their last words to each other were not of love, but of anger. She had begged him not to return to the capital with the false reports, to look deeper, to listen. He accused her of losing sight of the mission, of letting emotion cloud judgment. Their voices rose in the war tent beneath a sky bruised with storm, cutting words, silences too long. The air had turned metallic, the scent of rain and blood mixing even before the betrayal came. She left in fury. He didn't follow. Hours later, the thunder came, not from clouds but from crossbows. By the time he reached her, the bolts had already found their mark. Her blood had painted the grass in spirals, and her fingers still clutched the corner of the map they last argued over. The regret is a wound deeper than any steel, a truth he carries in silence, his apology forever unanswered. It haunts his every decision. When others plead for mercy, he listens longer. When whispers of rebellion reach his ears, he does not strike first. In every hostage spared, every torch left unlit, there echoes the chants he denied Celera. In moments alone, he replays their last conversation, reshaping it with kinder words, gentler tones that never were. The echoes follow him like phantoms through halls of shattered stone. He imagines what she would have said about his choices, whether she would have called him foolish or brave, cruel or kind. At times, in the stillness between campaigns, he walks into empty chapels and watches the dust settle through broken beams of light. The silence is so deep it hums, as if memory itself breathes around him. He places one of Judica's twin blades on the altar, as if awaiting judgment. Other nights he traces the map she once held, her old notations still faint in the margins, now ringed with soot and sweat. In those moments his war pauses, not in peace, but in mourning too deep for tears. Brask never speaks of that day, but he keeps a piece of her pendant on his belt, cracked and soot-darkened. It is a small rebellion, carried in silence. Brask remembers the man Veydran was before the fire, and still walks beside the ruin he became. Past battles. He held the line at Mirak's spine for 3 days without food, outnumbered 4-1. He burned the Riverhold Pass rather than let it fall to enemy hands, despite knowing civilians hid in the caves below. He wears the weight of these choices in silence. His name is whispered not as legend, but warning. Army of deserters, known as the Pale Host, his army is a grim mosaic. Runaway conscripts, exiled nobles, oath-breakers, maimed priests, and orphans of policy. They wear no uniform but bear a single white sash over blackened armor, often adorned with reliquaries of the past. Finger bones of loved ones, shards of burned oaths, or tongueless effigies sewn from battlefield linens. Helmets are sometimes shaped like hollowed skulls or engraved with prayers scored in nails. Some carry banners stitched from enemy standards turned inside out. Discipline is loose, but loyalty to Veydran is fanatical. Many sew his sigil, the shattered heart and glaive, into their flesh as proof of devotion. They sleep in shifting circles, heads always toward the ash fires, and wake to whispered rites before dawn. Their speech is riddled with fragments of old creeds twisted into curses, and their boots are painted red with blood wax in remembrance of the severance. Before battle they chant in broken unison, ash to chain, chain to oath, oath to fire. This mantra echoes across their ranks like a dirge, each word a pact reforged in defiance and pain. The chant is believed to summon the memory of betrayal, not to mourn, but to remind. To fight beside the Pale Host is to speak the names of what once was, then burn them from the tongue. Each soldier has burned a piece of their past in a fire they call the Severance, a ritual born from their shared disillusionment with the lies of banners and creeds they once served. It is said that in the smoke of that fire, some saw the faces of those they betrayed, and others those who betrayed them. Before each battle, they perform the rite of echoing dust, a ceremony where ash from old battlefields is mixed with blood and smeared across the face in the shape of a hollow heart. They chant in fractured harmony, recounting the names of cities they left behind, friends they buried, or lives they took. Drummers strike bones for rhythm, and incense made from charred banners fills the air. Veterans braid each other's hair with strings of black cloth torn from their own past standards, a symbolic strangling of who they once were. When the final bell is rung, a melted scrap of temple bronze, they march not in silence, but with low, rhythmic growls that sound more animal than human. Internal conflict. Veydran carries his doubt like a hidden wound, deep, festering, unseen by all but Varn. His every command echoes with the question, is this justice or vengeance in disguise? He wrestles with the fear that he has become the very shadow he once fought to escape. One memory strikes hardest, the siege of Hearthrow. As the floodgates opened at his order, he stood atop the citadel wall, watching the waters rise and torchlight vanish beneath the surface. A boy's scream had reached him above the chaos, not in protest, but in panic, searching for his mother. He said nothing. That scream still clings to him in dreams, echoing louder than the river's roar. But the moment he nearly broke came months earlier, when he butchered the family of a widely loved village chief who had dared to publicly denounce his father. The chief was away, and Veydran, seeking favor, executed the man's wife, 4 children, and aging mother-in-law by drowning in the village river in the town square. The villagers were forced to watch in silence. Afterward, he found a bundle of dried leaves beside the matron's crushed herb basket, Culta, left behind in her fleeing. He chewed them without knowing their nature, desperate to drown the screams still echoing in his head. The calm that followed was false, but it numbed the horror, and so he sought more. That was the beginning. That night, Van appeared for the first time, pacing the edges of the fire, silent. Since then, Veydran has kept both the herb and the beast close. Haunted by the ghost of Celira, the blood on his hands, and the smiles of siblings he silenced, he searches for redemption in war, but knows peace may never welcome him. Current status: leading an army of deserters toward the capital he once served, unsure if he is hero or tyrant. Capital's reaction: word of Veydran's approach spread like a crack in stained glass, fast and shattering. In the palace's high chamber, the regent, a young bureaucrat named Halreth, paced behind curtained windows, his face pale beneath the gold-threaded circlet. Raised after Veydran's fall and taught never to speak the name of the pale-bannered sun aloud, Halreth now felt that name echo through the marble halls. In the hours that followed, he summoned the remnants of the High Council behind locked doors. "We offer parley at the southern gate," he declared. "If he turns away, the city is spared. If he does not, we retreat to the inner ring and prepare the wildfire reserves." Though he postured as decisive, Halreth's hands shook beneath the table. His plan was survival, not victory. Stall, negotiate, and, if needed, flee. Privately, he penned letters to neighboring powers, pleading for intervention. "He is not just a man," Halreth wrote, "but a reckoning-given voice. I fear the city will not hold." In truth, he feared not the army but the man, for legends had grown like mold in the quiet years, of a fallen prince turned revenant, cloaked in ash and silence, who judged cities as easily as men. Within the pale host, whispers grew thick. One of Veydran's lieutenants, a scar-faced woman named Ternia, watched him closely. She had fought beside him through ash and frost, and though his silences had grown longer, she believed in the marrow beneath the mask. At night she kept vigil beyond his tent, listening to the mutters through smoke and grief. She remembered when he had spared a mutinous scout who had broken down crying, remembered the day he gave his own rations to a fevered child found during a raid. "He bleeds like us," she had said once, only louder. Her loyalty was not to the crown he once served, nor the crimes he confessed, but to the fight he now chose, to to break the old chains, even if it broke him in turn. Within the capital walls, bells rang in uneven rhythms, half warning, half wonder. Nobles whispered his name in fear behind lacquered doors, while the gutter folk lit candles for a reckoning long prayed for. Veterans of his father's regime sharpened blades with trembling hands, haunted by memories they'd buried. Some citizens rallied to prepare the gates, others simply stared toward the horizon, waiting for the judgment they thought forgotten. Among the city watch there were mutterings. Some remembered the boy Veydran had been, earnest and smiling in parade armor. Others remembered only the screams that followed his orders. The palace itself shuttered its great windows, hiding a new regent who had never looked Veydran in the eye. No one knew whether to raise the flag of surrender or defiance. The people braced, not for siege, but for consequence. In a narrow alley, under tattered laundry and flaking paint, a woman clutched her son close. She had been a child herself when Veydran came through her village, his banner pale, his eyes colder than the river. She remembered hiding under floorboards while her cousins were dragged out, her aunt begging for mercy in a dialect the soldiers didn't care to understand. She remembered the fire. To her, Veydran was no returning prince, no broken hero. He was a monster in borrowed armor, a ghost that still set her dreams aflame. Now that same banner flapped in the rising wind beyond the wall. She didn't cry or scream. She whispered her son's name, pressed a knife into his hand, and said, "If he passes our door, you strike. And don't stop until he stops moving." The pale-bannered sun had returned, and with him, the sum of every silence kept too long. In a soldier's quarters deep in the western barracks, an aging veteran cleaned his blade with shaking hands. He had once trained Veydran in swordplay when the boy's armor gleamed and his eyes still held wonder. He was kind once. The old man whispered to no one, the rag trembling in his grip. Let the gods be kind enough to leave a piece of that boy in him still. On the steps of a crumbling temple, a street preacher raised a hand skyward, shouting, "He brings not justice but plague in pale cloth. The sins of the father ride in the son's shadow. Do not open your gates." And in the slums near the copper wall, a barefoot child watched the soldiers pass in formation, their white sashes fluttering like ghosts. She had heard only stories of fire and blood, of green-eyed devils who wept only after they killed. She didn't understand much, but she clutched her older brother's hand and whispered, "Is he the monster from the songs?" Her brother didn't answer. He only held her tighter. Flashback and present confrontation. As the pale host crested the ridge that unveiled the spires of the capital, Veydran halted. The wind pulled at his tattered cloak, the gates of his old home gleaming like polished gilt under the rising sun. Vern appeared beside him, unbidden, its presence heavy with memory. His vision blurred, not from the glare, but from the scent in the wind. River water, burned herbs, screams. Then his shadow split, doubling on the ground beside him, flickering like a second soul trying to tear free. The world fell away, and he was back at the village square. The old woman sobbed as the children were dragged forward, their cries like needles in his brain. The sky had been the color of bruised fruit, and the trees bent as if they too turned away. He had spoken the command. He remembered the sound of water rushing, the way the villagers looked at him, not in fear, but disbelief, as if they had expected mercy. One of the children had clutched a charm, wooden, carved like a fish. He remembered kicking it into the river, as though banishing the ghost before it could form. Back in the present, Veydran clutched the same charm. He'd kept it. It dug into his palm now like judgment. Blood welled around its edges, staining the fish's carved eyes. The city's spires twisted for a moment, warping into skeletal fingers in his gaze before snapping back into stone. A sound like groaning iron followed the shift, low and resonant, vibrating through his chest as though the city itself mourned his return. He staggered slightly, the earth beneath his boots briefly softening to a pulse, warm and wet like flesh. The scent of old blood surged in his nostrils, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though the stones wept rust and bone dust, welcoming him home like a crypt welcomes a corpse. The horizon seemed to pulse like a beating wound. Varn pressed its skull against his side, grounding him. Behind him, Brask waited, silent. The army murmured, uncertain. He breathed deep, tasting Kaltar in the back of his throat. It did nothing. Not today. He spoke without turning. We march at dusk. Let them see the pale bannered sun by firelight. Not as executioner, as reckoner. Thanks for venturing into the storm with me. Every tale in this universe, from the shattered kingdoms to the cursed bloodlines, I write myself. All the art, all the visuals, every drop of atmosphere you feel, that's shaped by hand and pieced together with my passion to create. These stories take a lot of time to make real, so thank you for your patience when the drops take longer than I'd like. If you felt something during this journey, if you got goosebumps, held your breath, or just needed a break from the noise of the real world, do me a solid. Like the video, subscribe for more, and share it with a nerdy friend who needs to touch grass or get scorched by Atlas's lightning. Your support keeps this storm alive.